Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Hi, Maricella. How's it going?
I've had too much coffee.
Well, you're in a different time zone, so that makes sense.
Yeah, but I kind of like working from the different time zone. I'm in London right now, so I have to do some shifted hours to work with our team, but I'm more of a night owl. So the shifted hours work really well, especially to work with some of our team members who are very, very much morning people.
Yes, I know. We certainly run the gamut here at Ellevate, but I think that's one of the beauties of remote work. At the executive roundtable a couple weeks ago, it was a number of business leaders coming together to collectively define the future of work. What do we want to leave behind, and what do we want to bring with us into this future workplace and world? And one of the things that really stood out was more of these hybrid workplaces, workplace flexibility. And it's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, if you say have, more of a morning person or a night owl, building that culture of trust where people can create a work environment that works for them, and certainly gives at Ellevate the flexibility to work from wherever, even very different time zones like the UK. But a great experience that, you can do that and be with your family and have those experiences.
It is huge. I will say that. I mean, we talk a lot about what companies can do for their employees. This flexibility that we have is just amazing. Right now, I'm in London. We have one of our teammates in Mexico. We have other teammates around the country in the US. We've had people work from Australia, from France, from Hawaii. It makes such a difference to be able to do that. And you're right. You can only do that if you have a culture of trust.
Yeah, that is so true. Trust is critical. And I know I was in a conversation recently where there was a debate on, is trust earned or is trust given? I think we approach that very differently, depending on who you are and your experiences. But what we do know is trust is a key element of building relationships, of building community. And it's a key element of the Ellevate's Squads program, where we aim to create impact in your life, in your career, by giving you a squad of peers that meet with you every week, half an hour a week. It's a low lift time commitment, but a big lift in terms of impact. Building that culture of trust where you share your deepest goals, your deepest challenges, ambitions, dreams, and get that collective support from others who are going to help you create that framework to getting where you want to go. It's an unbelievable experience, one I've been honored to participate in the past couple of years. And I encourage all of our listeners to sign up to join an Ellevate squad. I'm not just saying that. I truly, honestly believe it. It's been transformational for me to really make that space to talk to others who know where I'm coming from, understand what I do every day and what that's like to be CEO of a company, and are there to help support me in a way that's not just performative. It's real, it's genuine, and it's true. And I think the squad's experience is something we should all participate in.
Yeah, I've done 2 squads, which is less than I should have done. I didn't sign up for the last cohort because I had way too many things on my plate going on, and I regretted it after a little bit because those 30 minutes a week were set, intentionally to focus on my goals and what I'm trying to achieve. And I didn't have that. Like, I didn't have that accountability and I didn't have that structure, and it was a lot harder to do it on my own. Squads applications open Monday, June 13th. So you can be on the lookout at ellevatenetwork.com and apply once they're open.
And don't delay, because our squad's application period will be ending soon. So go to ellevatenetwork.com/squads to register for your squad. It will be an experience you don't want to miss. Talk to your squad about how you'll end the year on a high note, or how to set your intentions and goals for 2023, how to navigate a new position, how to overcome any challenges, whatever is top of mind for you. They've got the expertise and the advice to support you. So register today for your Ellevate squad. And now let's get to my interview with Rita Kakati-Shah. Rita has an unbelievable story, one that really, I think, connects with each of us on a very personal level, where she grew up, what that experience was like, and how she's gotten to where she is today. She's an award-winning gender inclusion strategist. Rita is the author of The Goddess of Go-Getting, a unique read that focuses on DEI using her personal life experiences as examples. Now let's get to my conversation with Rita. Rita, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
Thank you so much, Kristy, for having me.
Let's get started learning a bit more about you. Could you share with our listeners today your story and how you got to where you are?
Sure, yes. So I'm a girl from London, born and bred Londoner. My parents originally come from Assam in the northeast of India. So they emigrated to the UK many, many moons ago. So my brother and I, we were born there. So I was raised there, educated there, started my career there as well. My career first started in finance. I spent a decade in Goldman Sachs in the London office. And I started off on the trading floor in pan-European sales trading. And this was in the early 2000s. So I was one of very few women there at the time, and certainly one of very few women of color. And I really got into the diversity and inclusion and women empowerment space really just by default of being who I was. This was, as I mentioned, back in the early 2000s. So this was before it was even called DEI or any of the branding that we have today existed. And it was just really by just asking questions. I've always been a really social person, Kristy. And my questions were like, where are the other women? Or let's network more in a professional setting. And that's really where that journey started and how I got really involved in that space. So spent a decade in finance and in different areas of the firm. So I did start off on the trading side on the equities, then moved into fixed income and did a few different roles at the firm during my 10-year tenure there. And then I transitioned into the pharmaceutical industry because a family friend approached me one day and said, hey, Rita, you have a business background. Can you help me set up something to do with clinical trials and drug development in Delaware? So my first question was, what's Delaware? Not where is it, but what's Delaware? Girl coming from London, I'd never heard of this place and certainly had no idea. This is like a tax haven where companies set up in the US. So long story short, this is how I got my feet wet in a completely different industry. And I loved it. I was in business development, so I got to travel here, there, and everywhere. And that's what brought me to New York, which is where I now live. And I settled here after I got married. I now have two young children. They're 7 and 9. A third, actually, I have a pandemic puppy I should include in that. And when my kids were very young, I did take about 3.5, 4 years off to raise them, Kristy. And I got to tell you, out of all the jobs I've ever done, by far the most challenging was that period of time I spent as that full-time mother. Not only are you working 24/7, you can never take a sick day, a day off, it's nonstop. And, it's a Saturday morning, I want to have a lie-in. Oh, no, it doesn't work that way. So I learned a lot in that journey and a lot of professional skills, which I didn't learn in the paid professional workspace. Things like communication, negotiation, I learned much more as a full-time mother. So that really was what planted the seed for me starting my company, UMA, which is really an empowerment platform for women and minorities to build up confidence, to inspire that success journey, and to really build resilience and leadership, really facets that I saw were things to work on in my own journey as that mother. So that's in a nutshell what UMA does and why I set it up. We are around the world now. We have, we do a lot of corporate training, strategy work, using diversity and inclusion principles. A lot of speaking I do as well, not just for corporations, but for academic institutions and policy forums as well. And that's really a nutshell of my journey.
Thank you, Rita, for sharing your journey. And it's one that I think so many of us can see a bit of ourselves in. I'd love to start us off asking you to define resilience and leadership. You just mentioned both of those words as, tied to the work that you do. And how do you define them?
That's a great question, Kristy. So resilience is something, again, it's picked up from my journey. So resilience, I used to think was just, you just go in there, you've got to have the strength to work the entire day and sort of drum on forward. It's so much more than that. Resilience to me is the ability to communicate across multiple genres, to keep the strength, not just what you do in the workplace, but outside the workplace as well. One thing the pandemic has taught us, Kristy, is that the workplace isn't just what you see and what you get only in your paid salary job. It is so much more than that. It is the family life, it's social life, it's everything that happens outside that. And so resiliency is that sort of that strength and that ability to continue on. And I use communication a lot in the resiliency practice and confidence, Kristy, because it's paramount to that process. The ability to understand what communication even means. Before I became a mom, I thought communication was being able to stand in front of a room and present, or put together a slide deck and just present that. It's so much more. It's empathy, it's listening, it's the ability to read the room. And that is so important to be an effective communicator, and one I specifically learned when I was out of the paid workforce. And it's these sort of skills that make you more resilient as a leader. So that then goes into the next point of leadership. Leadership in the olden day, when I was certainly studying, leadership to me then was, you were measured on your intelligence quotient, your IQ, as in how smart you were on paper. And that defined somehow how good of a leader you may or may not have been, or good of an employee you were going to be in the future. Then you moved across to the next decade, and then we looked more at the EQ, the emotional quotient, to sort of the ability to understand and think a little bit more in terms of other people's shoes. And then the way I like to think of it, and this is something I talk about in my book, The Goddess of Go-Getting, is a step ahead of that, which is a combination of your IQ and your EQ to form the DQ, the decency quotient. And this is something where it's the ultimate test of leadership, in my view, which is really the ability to do right by others. So you're not only trying to be an intelligent manager, but you also have to be empathetic to the entire team, not just one person, which can happen sometimes as well. So these are sort of just some tidbits of ways I loosely define the terms resilience and leadership.
I think that they're terms that, and as you mentioned, that are, they're evolving and dynamic. And so it's partially why I asked, resilience, especially coming out of this pandemic and this time that we've been going through. And, we've talked about the impact of it on women and caregivers. And there's definitely resilience that I think we've all found in ourselves that maybe we hadn't recognized that was there. And then leadership, to seeing ourselves as leaders as well. And then the redefinition of leadership. I mean, you totally hit it straight on, that decency. And, how are we leaders that are, I think, defining the future, and the future of what work is, the future of what business is, the future of how, what our customer is going to need and how we best solve that. So it's this conversation in this time to really get inspired about, where we've come, how far we've come, but how much further we can go. Rita, you mentioned your book. Could you share a bit more about that?
Sure, yes. So the book is called The Goddess of Go-Getting, Your Guide to Confidence, Leadership, and Workplace Success. And it's really a project I've been working on for, at least 2 years. This started pre-pandemic. And Kristy, I've got to tell you, I mean, I've co-authored books before, and I've co-authored research papers and sort of different publications here and there. But authoring and writing your own book is a completely different ballgame. This is something I've always wanted to write. It's my life story, both personally and professionally. But I had no idea, it's just such a process, writing your own book, because it's a narrative. You've got to form it over 50,000 words. You've got to put them into chapters. It's got to make sense, not just to myself writing it. Of course, I understand the stories, but does it make sense to others? And is it telling the story and having the impact on others that I want it to have? So that was my initial, challenge of how do I write this? Why I wrote the book was because of my life's journey and being in this diversity, equity, inclusion space, being somebody who's an advocate for gender equality and, the youth, women and folks from minority backgrounds. This is something from work perspective, I get called to quote unquote fix at times. There have been certain incidents that have specifically occurred over the last couple of years during the pandemic that have caused a flurry, I guess, with DEI input out there. And the way I was seeing it was that it actually can cause segregation instead of bringing people together. And this is one of the main reasons I thought, okay, I need to put my foot down. I need to put my thoughts on paper and start bringing people together again. So the way I started doing that was I started writing, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a business book I'm writing here because it's a lot of business examples I can share. Then the more I started to write, it started to become more like a memoir, more of my personal stories. And then I thought, gosh, why am I trying to just stick within one genre or the other? I can't tell one without the other. So then it became, when people ask me now, I call it part memoir, part business book. It's a bit of both, but it really is a life journey. My personal experiences, which really, really helped shape the choices I made professionally as well. I talk about incidents where I was a 5-year-old on a playground at school, and I noticed for the first time my skin tone was darker than everybody else. But then subsequently, I learned classical Indian dancing as a child as well at weekends. And then all of a sudden, my skin tone was now the fairest in the room. So I have had the issue of, do I belong? Where do I belong? Who am I? From a very young age. So I use examples like that to shape why and how I feel certain ways. How, if you are coming from some sort of a minority background, that you will feel that sense at some point of where do I fit in? And if you felt it from young age, automatically you are more empathetic. There are so many people, especially people of color, women, where we've had to fit in to situations from a younger age. So in a way, we become more empathetic by nature. But then when I wrote this book, Kristy, I thought, do I just want to make this for women? Do I just want to make it for folks of ethnic minority backgrounds? And I thought, no, in order to make change happen, I'm a change maker, I believe I am, and I want others around me to be change makers too. I thought this has to resonate and get across to everybody. So your stereotypical, again, quote unquote, white male in the room also should be able to pick up this book and think, aha, and have those sort of moments. So even the way I define minority, I take that out of the traditional box and I say, you know what, everybody is a minority. Everyone's been through a situation where they have been the lesser of a group. You could be a vegetarian in a room full of meat eaters. You could be from a particular religious background in a room full of more orthodox religious folks or a different religion. You could be the one pregnant lady in a cocktail evening and somebody forgot to put water down. Whatever it is, at some point, everybody has felt that sense of, gosh, I've got to put an effort to try and fit in here, and they feel left out. You could be an introvert or an extrovert, and it's the same kind of dynamic. So no matter where you are in life, where you come from, these are things that have affected all of us. But by using these examples and calling it the goddess of go-getting, I really try to invoke those feelings of empowerment, of confidence, to really help all of us put ourselves in other people's shoes to help make the world a better place.
I'm trying to think of the right word because I'm processing what you're saying, and something that's really resonating with me is how you're making belonging very individually focused, and it should be, and that is right. And then when you say that, I'm like, absolutely, we each have a role to play. But when you think about belonging, particularly in terms of the workplace, it's like, okay, we want a workplace of belonging, but how can a company actually attain that, right? I think that that's why we have lacked progress for so long as companies, particularly they're trying to create programs and policies and ERGs and mentoring and so on and so forth for their entire population. And so then you just like to put people into big silos and buckets that aren't particularly intersectional or aren't nuanced enough to truly recognize each individual and, how you create that culture of belonging for them. And so your individual human-centered approach, I think, hits it right on the head, which is, to really create that culture of belonging and inclusion. Every single one of us, it has to be ingrained in every employee, every manager, every leader, every person, that we have a role to play in making that a reality.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up. So one of the examples I bring up specifically on that is that ultimately, when we think about DEI, and there's so many different definitions out there now because it's a thing now. But ultimately for me, DEI is just creating community and creating a sense of belonging, right? So research out there shows that, 79% of people have left the workforce if they don't feel valued. And that sort of value can be broken down further in terms of, they just felt they've been slighted, their opinion doesn't count, they felt that they were left out of a situation, things like that. So ultimately, when you do not feel valued, when you do not feel like you belong in a team or in the workforce, you're going to leave. So at that point, if a company then dangles a paycheck in front of you or a promotion or some sort of a shiny title, the damage has already been done. It's too late. It's almost too little too late. So my point is, you really, really got to think, when I talked about decency earlier on, that DQ needs to hit the manager, the team leader, your teammates earlier on in the cycle to create that sense of belonging. Yes, companies at the moment, everywhere, especially in the US and in the UK where I'm from as well, are doing this a lot. But unfortunately, when I go into companies, I sort of see like sticking a bandage on rather than finding out where the leak is coming from. So there is a lot of quota filling still, where people are saying, okay, we all have to get DEI things in place, or we have to hire folks just, because we don't have that many of this particular segment in society. And I understand why people are doing it. But my first question is, why are you doing it? And how is this going to change things? Every single person has to understand and have a stake in the why and own it, right? It's almost like when you go to a company meeting, right? Everybody is sort of, part of a team and it's day in, day out. After a while, you kind of think, oh gosh, why am I even doing this? What am I doing? Because you can't always see the bigger goal, especially during the pandemic when most people were working from home. It was sometimes hard to feel fully in touch with what company goals were. But then you think of town halls, and then what an amazing job, the leader, the CEO, the main sort of department head does of sort of motivating everyone again. And it's that skill set to try and get everyone to feel that sense of belonging. When people feel they are part of the mission, they automatically feel like they belong again. So as you mentioned, Kristy, yes, there are different affinity groups out there. But again, those affinity groups can cause segregation if not done in the correct way. What is the point of having them? Ultimately, people, have these groups so they can find, someone that they can talk to, celebrate cultural holidays with, or have certain celebrations, certain festivals. But this is for the good for the whole firm. Imagine sort of celebrating this with everybody else and inviting others to join. And that's ultimately the reason initially why people wanted to do it. But unfortunately, some people forget that, and it doesn't always come out that way. So sometimes when I get called in, it's almost like, gosh, there's women's network doing something there. It's closed off. I can't get in. I'm totally switched off. And it has the opposite effect. And then you're building into the stereotype, which is the reason it was formed in the first place. So ultimately, when I talk about the belonging, it's about how do you get everyone together? How do you make everyone feel like they're a part of the team? Almost forget about the glossy stuff on the outside. That's the first and foremost what you're meant to be doing.
I'm thinking about companies that are smaller in size, right? So something like 99% of all companies in the US are outside of the Fortune 1000, and they employ roughly 47% of employees, right? And I do think that, larger Fortune 1000 companies, maybe large cap firms and companies are, they have the time, they have the resources, they have the personnel to focus on diversity and inclusion, which is everything from, talent pipeline development, training, cultivation, community building, and beyond. And so for maybe some of the smaller companies that don't have necessarily the money or the resources or the staff focused on diversity and inclusion, are there some other wins or obvious steps that they should take? And particularly, I'm thinking as well about the managers, because you mentioned, and I agree, the role that managers play in creating that culture of inclusion. But so many managers don't really have training. They're sort of sinking and not swimming sometimes, and it doesn't become the top of mind priority when it should.
Yeah, totally. And actually, to your point on management, research also shows that 58% of people leave their company, not because of their company, because of their boss. So to your point, you might have somebody who's a boss who knows their stuff really well, but they just have never been taught how to manage. So because of that, folks are going to end up leaving. But to your point, for smaller companies, I think there is a lot of confusion these days that if you put together a DEI initiative, it costs a lot of money, it needs a lot of resources. And ultimately, no, it doesn't. What is it about? It's about making people feel like they belong, feeling a sense of community. There are so many ways of doing that without going and putting your purse, finger back into your purse again. And things like, it could be like a mentoring or a buddy system. You could have two new joiners together, and one of them has been around for a few more months. And they can just spend some time and chat to them a little bit. And automatically that new person feels they have someone to go to and ask sort of daily, day in and day out questions, sort of the technical stuff too. And they get on, start building up their rapport. They go to lunch together, or if they're working remotely, they kind of have remote coffees together or whatever it is, So there is somebody there. And mentoring as well, it's huge. It's a great benefit to folks within teams. But I love reverse mentoring as being a big part to play as well, specifically when you're trying to change a few mindsets, or you might have a leader who doesn't quite get it, so to speak. And that's where somebody more junior, perhaps from a different team, would reverse mentor up the manager instead. And that can be, a bunch of aha moments that come from that. So there are definitely things that can be done that does not need a whole rehaul or a restructure, but these are just simple things that any team can do and go along with, because these are just sort of part and parcel of that, creating that culture, that sort of community that you like. You can go and do projects together, or you can, depending on what the aim of your team or your workplace is, you could just sort of do different voluntary projects as well, if that's a part of your scope as well. But things like that, there is so much more to it than just putting pen to paper and just what your day in, day out office role is about.
The title of your book is The Goddess of Go-Getting, Your Guide to Confidence, Leadership, and Workplace Success. I want to ask about confidence. I hear all the time across the spectrum of professional experience, lack of confidence. And it happens maybe when we're putting ourselves out there in public speaking like you are now, or when we're standing behind our thought leadership, when we're presenting, when we're just in a tough management situation or leading during a pandemic. I mean, so much happens day in and day out that causes us to question that confidence. What thoughts do you have on that, and what are some of the ways in which you really lean into your confidence?
It's a great question. So confidence is something that affects every single person, right? It doesn't matter what gender you're from, what ethnic background, it affects everybody. And it can come up in different ways, as you've just mentioned. So one of the things that I like to do as an exercise is really sort of, just think about who your role models are out there. And, it could be anyone. It could be a parent. It could be somebody famous. It could be a public speaker, a TEDx speaker. It could be a politician, a celebrity, just somebody out there that means something to you personally. And then you think of, multiple folks, more than one, and you think, wow, there's so many different things about them. When we think of role models, we think of folks that we can aspire to be. But quite often we confuse that with trying to be like others, and that can often dampen our confidence further. So what I like to tell people is, if you look at these people that you've put in your head, whoever these role models are, for me, my mum's one of them, for example, and another could be a politician that I grew up with, but the fact is they're totally different. They might be confident, they might be sort of calm and poised, whatever adjective comes to mind. But the fact is they're completely unique. Every single person you think of out there is unique. They're different. So when we have that situation of going to present, even if you and I, Kristy, were going to present the identical slide deck or the identical presentation, there's no reason to get nervous about it, because you have a very different life experience to me. My personal examples are mine and yours are yours. And we could just mold that into whatever presentation or narrative we're doing, and it would be ours, 100%, right? So things like that, I think if you kind of come out of it and said, okay, I've got this is my unique journey, I'm just going to tell it, it really, really can help get out of that imposter syndrome that so many of us face for different examples in life. Something else as well, when we talk about the confident journey that I like to pay attention to, and I mention quite a lot actually in the book, is specifically between men and women and how we communicate. So research shows that women, we have more of a rapport style of communicating because we're more empathetic by nature. So we're more conversive, we kind of chit-chat a little bit more when we converse. And men have a more of a reporting style of communication. So it's more factual, it's more to the point, it's shorter and sweeter. So my clients quite often come to me and that phrase mansplaining comes up as an example, and say, gosh, I completely lose my confidence because I went into this meeting, I told my manager my great idea, and then my colleague comes along who happened to be male, paraphrases it, and you know what? They got the credit, but it was mine. And I hear this so many times. So my whole thing is like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's take gender out of it. Let's take everything out of it. Let's just analyze how and what you did and why. And I go back to things like, think of an elevator pitch. We've all heard that if you're going to a networking event, prepare that 10 to 15 second, short and sweet, concise elevator pitch of who you are. It's the same thing when you're delivering a brand new idea for the first time. Make it into a practiced, rehearsed elevator pitch that's short and sweet, concise, and to the point. You get that across, there is no room for anyone to paraphrase after that. And also, it's the art of pitching. It's the art of negotiating. So these are sort of little techniques I try to tell people. And then the other one is tone of voice. Quite often as women, we tend to raise our voice at the end of sentences. Why? Because we're empathetic. And I'll give you an example, Kristy. So my folks and I come from a town called Hornchurch in the outskirts of London. So most people haven't heard of Hornchurch. So I might say this. I said, hi, Kristy, my name is Rita, and I come from a place called Hornchurch. And I've said that because I don't want to embarrass you in case you haven't heard of Hornchurch, right? So I've raised my voice. But actually, from the listener, you're thinking, gosh, does she not even know where she comes from? Whereas if I'd said this instead, Kristy, I said, hi, my name is Rita, and I come from a town called Hornchurch. I've said exactly the same thing, but I've just stated a fact. The second one sounds more like I actually know what I'm doing, but I've said exactly the same thing. So things like that can really, really help confidence as well. That, and then the other one is just body language, how we poised. From the ages of 9 to 14, when we started to go into early pubescent, adolescent years, research shows that's when our body language changes. Our bodies change and we start to hunch forward a bit or fold our arms a bit more because we're ashamed of our bodies or we're trying to figure out what's going on, and we tend to do that, and that sticks with us. And then we go into comfort poses in meetings, whether we're sitting in a chair, whether we're about to present. When you're sitting slumped, yes, it's so comfortable to do that, Kristy, but you're that much less likely to go put your hand up and take part in a brainstorming meeting than if you sat up and sort of leant forward a little bit and sort of just kind of engage more. You're more likely to just jump in there and just give your ideas. So it's little things like that. I've just given you very few ideas. I'm just barely scratched the surface, but just little things like that. There are so many techniques of how all of us can appreciate and sort of increase our confidence from that. There are so many more as well. I delve into that in the book, but those are the top 4 that I just wanted to mention to you today.
Rita, I cannot wait for our listeners to read this book and to learn more. Where would they be able to purchase a copy?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. So it's available on retailers everywhere. Amazon is generally a good go-to place, Barnes & Nobles, or, if you have a mum and pop shop or your favorite sort of women-owned bookstore or minority-owned bookstore, you can totally go across there too. But yeah, Goddess of Go-Getting, your guide to confidence, leadership, and workplace success. Yeah, it's available and around. So I look forward to hearing back from folks what they think of it.
Well, thank you so much, Rita, for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It was wonderful to hear from you and be inspired by the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristy. Appreciate it.
welcome back, Maricella. I'm sure you were completely blown away by Rita's story and all that she had to offer.
Yeah, and I don't want to forget this to say this because I think it's a very important point, which is this is the last squad we're doing in 2022. So if you don't sign up now, you don't get a chance to sign up for another squad until next year. So it is worth it to try it out.
You do. Shout out to Megan, who is our producer and helps source some of these guests and get it all set up. So yay, Megan. Rita is fantastic. Please, if you are as touched by her story and insights as I was, I encourage you to share this podcast with your network. We need to lean in more to sharing the things that inspire us, that move us, where we learn and where we grow. And this is something I will certainly be sharing, and I hope that all of you do too. If you enjoy any of the Ellevate episodes, you can share it on social media or send it to a friend. We welcome them into this community where we talk about the conversations that matter, the stories that inspire us, and the women changing the face of business. Earlier, Maricella and I were sharing about our squads program. Again, please don't hesitate. Just sign up today. You don't want to miss that opportunity. But beyond squads, we come together every week with our roundtables. So we're at the squad. You'll be with the same group of 6 to 8 peers over a 12-week period. That's a great opportunity to go deep and really focus on what's top of mind for you. But in our roundtables, we meet weekly. The community is ever changing and evolving, but it's centered on going into smaller groups, meeting others, brainstorming ideas, and walking away with an action plan. Each roundtable has a set topic, so things that are relevant to you individually, to hit your goals and dreams, things relevant to your teams and companies, and obviously topics relevant to the world in which we're living. Our upcoming roundtables include communication and leading through change at the executive roundtable. Very important. We've been talking a lot about the power of communication and how you communicate change. Our world, unfortunately, continues to change at a rapid pace. I guess it is unfortunate because a lot of the change recently has not been the best. But as an executive, knowing how to communicate and lead through that change is critically important. In our Rising Leaders Roundtable, we will be reflecting on mobilized women and the lessons learned. At the Entrepreneur Roundtable, product development for services businesses, so key to how you develop your products and grow. And women seeking confidence, we're talking about kindness is not a weakness. That is one I will definitely attend because I'm being honest, I'm a very kind person and sometimes see it as a weakness. And I think embracing who we are and really using that as our superpower is a great way to differentiate ourselves in the workplace and to lean into the ways that we are authentically and truly ourselves.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.